Start the recording. Thank you, Doug. Welcome to another in a series of program meetings sponsored by the Woods and Wetlands Group of the Illinois Sierra Club. My name is Rosemary Heileman, and I will be your host this evening. Our program meetings feature speakers on topics relating to our environment, stewardship, wildlife and nature, public policy, and anything about outdoor activities like hiking and canoeing, bird watching. In a minute, we will hear from our featured speaker, Alana Bartolai of the Ecological Services Program, and she is the coordinator at Lake County Health Department. But first, we have a couple of brief announcements. As Doug said, we are recording this program so that you can watch it in the future. Turn off your camera if you don't wish to appear on the video. We will send out the YouTube address for the program later this week so you can watch it again. Before we begin, first, please make sure you are muted, especially if you have a barking dog, a television, or other commotion in the background. And second, please feel free to ask any questions of our speaker this evening by using the chat room at the bottom of your screen. We will select questions afterwards, and they will be directed to the speaker. Now let's move on to our October Sunday Speaker Series program. Alana Bartolai is the Ecological Services Program Coordinator at Lake County Health Department and has been, and that's in Illinois for those who might be coming from out of state, and has been with the Lake County Health Department for 10 years. She started as a water quality specialist and now oversees the ecological program, which includes water quality monitoring, vector surveillance, swimming facility inspections, and solid waste programs. Alana has her bachelor's degree in geology from Macalester College and a Master of Science degree in water resources from the University of Minnesota. We welcome you, Alana. We're happy to have you.
Thanks, Rosemary. Thank you guys for having me here. I'm going to share my screen. So give me one moment while I get that set up. Okay, can you guys all see that screen okay on your end?
We're seeing your whole slide program, not the individual slide, though.
Oh, let's see here.
It's like you need to start from the beginning up there.
Yeah, I did click that, but I think I have it in presenter view. So let me try this. Okay, how about that? Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I am going to turn off my video while I talk just to make sure my connection's okay, but I'll turn it back on for Q&A. So what I'm going to talk about today is that we have a project that we've been working on in the county, and it's on carp removal for nutrient enrichment. And first, I just kind of want to give you a little bit of an overview of the Ecological Services Group. So our group, we're pretty small. There's only myself and then two other staff, two water quality specialists. In the summer, we do get some intern help. So we get like up to 3 interns in the summer, which is really nice to have. But overall, a pretty small group. We do all the water quality monitoring in Lake County. So that includes like your swimming beaches, both along Lake Michigan and the inland beaches. We do lake monitoring. So that's kind of ecological health of the lakes. We do stream monitoring. We also have a focus on harmful algal blooms. We do some biological assessments as well. So those are things like aquatic plant surveys. We do a lot of invasive species monitoring. So that can include plants. There's a couple invasive plants out there. And then our carp removal falls under that category as well, as carp are an invasive species. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We do a lot of outreach. We work directly with lake associations and we'll go to meetings. We work with them one-on-one. We also do a variety of presentations and workshops throughout the year. And we kind of are a technical resource for Lake County and as well as other kind of agencies. We work really closely with Illinois EPA, Illinois Department of Public Health, and IDNR. Rosemary kind of mentioned ECO has some other programs under it as well. One is like vector-borne surveillance. So that's like mosquito and tick surveillance in the county. So the project we're going to talk about today is this removal of carp to reduce nutrient enrichment. This has been a joint effort. We're working with Lake County Forest Preserve on this, as well as Lake County Stormwater Management Commission was involved in the initial process as they helped us get a grant to kind of get this started. And so this grant that we got was an Illinois EPA 319 grant. 319 grants are for impaired water bodies that you can apply for a grant if it has an impairment on it. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. But this is where the funding came for the initial project. We applied back in 2018. In 2019, that application was approved at the end of 2019. So that's almost a 2-year process just to get the grant in. And then, of course, that was 2019. And then 2020, we had some world events happen. So we didn't start our first official day of carp removal wasn't until 2021. So we've been doing it for the past 3 years, and we're going to go over some of those results. And we've seen a lot of great success from it so far. So our project, in part of this grant process, we chose 8 lakes. They were all within the Des Plaines River watershed. And so the 8 lakes that we chose, you can kind of see where they're located, but we had Hastings Lake, McDonald's Lake, Des Plaines Lake, Slough Lake. Those are all Lake County Forest Preserve lakes. And then we had a few other that are not Forest Preserve lakes, but are also glacial lakes in Lake County. So, and then St. Mary's Lake, Big Bear, and Little Bear. So these lakes were chosen specifically because they all have an impairment listed for that lake, and that impairment is for total phosphorus and total suspended solids. So I know this graph has a lot of stuff on here. Basically, this is the list from Illinois EPA of impairment status for these different lakes. So because they had an impairment status, they were eligible for this 319 grant. And then additionally, all these lakes were identified in Lake County Stormwater Management's plans that carp were a problem in those lakes. So they were identified carp removal would benefit it, and they also had an impairment status, which made it a good criteria for this grant application. So the reason we're focusing on carp is because they're one of the most damaging invasive fish species in the US. So when they're breeding, they are thrashing around in the water pretty significantly. They really create turbid waters. That's increasing things like total suspended solids in the water column. They're increasing nutrient loading because phosphorus is attached to sediment. As that's getting thrashed around, you're increasing your phosphorus in your lakes. And then that sediment resuspension. This is also affecting a number of things. It's limiting aquatic plant growth in the community. It's also affecting other fish species. So it is an important species to remove from a lake. And you're going to see kind of some of those impacts of what we can do to restore lakes by removing carp if we know that carp are a serious problem in those lakes. So just another kind of image of carp. So they are invasive species. That means they're not originally from this area. They were originally native to Europe and Asia. You can see the image of it on the right. You can kind of see those 2 barbels on each side of the mouth, one of the distinguishing features of it. And as an invasive species, it does have some competitive advantage over other fish. It can survive in really stagnant water, so it can survive in really low dissolved oxygen values. So typically with lakes, we're looking at having values of DO above 5 milligrams per liter. That's like a healthy fish level for dissolved oxygen, but carp can survive in those lower conditions. So it does make them, they have that ability to thrive in kind of more intense scenarios. And then in the spring, they're typically spawning right when it gets around 64 degrees, and they lay a ton of eggs. So one female carp can lay around 300,000 eggs. And so this all adds up. So our project, our goal was to remove carp from the lakes with the idea to restore kind of aquatic plant growth. And overall, this is going to improve our water quality in the lake. So this is an image of our electrofishing boat that we take on the lake. So when we're removing carp, we're using an electrofishing boat to do that. What that means is it's sending electric currents into the water. The highlighted images are where those currents are being put into the water. They're dropped down into the water there. We do have a generator on the boat. It converts AC to DC current with the electrofishing box, and you are starting and stopping that current. So it's not always going, you're starting and stopping it. And what that does, it stuns the fish. So it doesn't harm them in that process. They're kind of stunned and floating. It will stun all fish in that process. And then what you're doing is you're netting out the carp. So that's what the image is on here as well. You'll see the person with the long pole with the net. So as the carp kind of come to the surface, we're removing the carp from the water. The other fish are fine, and then they'll end up swimming away. We had a number of lakes that we focused on. These are 3 highlighted ones. So we have St. Mary's on the left, we have McDonald's in the middle, and then we have Hastings Lake on the right. What you're seeing in these graphs is our kind of effective electrofishing zone. We're really looking at that zone from 5 feet deep to the shoreline. So that's what this is showing. So you can see each lake is different. Like McDonald's Lake in the middle is very, very shallow. So the whole lake is an effective zone for us to do shocking. Versus St. Mary's and Hastings, we have smaller zones right along the shoreline because that's where the depth is 5 feet or less. So we do a lot of prep work before we're even heading out on the lake, making these maps, kind of, assessing the lake conditions before we even get out there. While we're out there and removing the carp, we're also getting representative samples of all the fish that we take out. And we do this by weighing and measuring about 10 representative carp during the lake. And then we can use this data to kind of document carp demographics over time. So we'll show you some of those as well. And it was a lot of hard work. So carp can be pretty big fish, and removing it takes a lot of effort. So we've had a lot of people over the time come and help us on the boat as well. These are some of our interns on the left with the truck, but it is a lot of hard work to kind of remove all this carp. And we're not just removing like 50 carp at a time. Sometimes our bigger numbers have been 300 to 400 carp removed in one day from a lake. So it's a big number. So I'm going to kind of move into some of our results from the carp removal process. And I'm going to start with some of the fish numbers. So I know this is a huge graph, so don't get too scared with it. But what we can see is we can see our total number of carp removed. And this is really just 2021 to 2022. That was the year of the grant. We've removed more since then. But you can see some of these numbers: Big Bear, Little Bear Lake, total carp removed 876, Crooked 1,265, Displain 794. We get down to McDonald's, Slough, St. Mary's. Those are all about 2,500 carp removed. What you're seeing on the rest of this graph, there's some equations that we can use to relate, like how much carp are we removing? How does that equate to phosphorus removal? There's not a ton of studies on this. There are some that come from Minnesota on this, and there's some equations. So we were able to use that equation in some scientific research paper and make it applicable to our scenarios here, and look at how much kind of phosphorus we're removing from the system by removing carp. There's kind of 2 different ways to do this because there's phosphorus in the flesh of carp as well. So just by removing carp, about 1% of their body weight is composed of phosphorus. So even just removing the carp itself, you're already removing, if you can look at some of these numbers all the way on the right side of the graph, if you look at like McDonald's, 64 pounds of carp, pounds of phosphorus removed just by removing the carp itself. And that's not taking into effect the resuspension of the sediment, the phosphorus in the water column. So it is an effective method at removing phosphorus in a lake. These are some graphs that kind of show the metrics of the carp data that we collected. So CPUE is a common term. It's called catch per unit effort. It's a data metric that kind of captures the difficulty of which carp are caught. So in the beginning, it's really easy to catch all the carp because there's thousands and thousands of carp in the lake. And so the effort is easier. As you start to remove more and more, that effort is getting harder over time. So that CPU is decreasing. So we are starting to see some of that trend in these graphs between 2021 and 2024. The other graphs we're looking at, this is still the CPU graph. We do have some median here. You can kind of see the numbers starting at 59 in 2021, now kind of down to 44. So there has been a decrease. The other data we have is the carp length and the carp weight, which I mentioned we collect by doing kind of 10 representative samples each time we're out doing carp removal. In theory, we should see the length and the weight somewhat increase over time as we start to kind of narrow the class of the fish that are in the lake. This is going to take longer than the time span we have to see here. We also do have some data bias within our data collection. So we are trying to target as many carp as we can for removal. And what that means is we're targeting more in the spring season. So they're going to weigh differently, and the length's going to be different in the spring than they are in the fall. So most of our sampling is coming from that data set. And you can kind of see some of those outliers, especially in 2024. We haven't even done fall sampling yet, so you can see some of those lengths are smaller. We expect over time we'll be able to see a better trend in both our length as well as our weight. You can see right now it's pretty kind of staying the same between the years. Those were in general, that was between all the lakes, the graphs I showed before. This is for Slough Lake specifically. So Slough Lake is in northern Lake County. It is a Lake County Forest Preserve lake. We have the same image here. We have our CPU on the left, carp length, carp weight. Once again, we're not seeing really strong trends here yet. So it is something we're going to continue to monitoring, and we'll see how the trends kind of progress. Now I'm going to get into some of our visual results, and I'll go into our water chemistry results. So a lot of the visual stuff we see on the lake, we would hope would be tangible nutrient reduction. And we were lucky because this year we actually did water quality sampling on the lakes that we did carp removal. So what that means is we have water quality data now to compare from before we started doing carp removal to after, and see are we seeing decreases in total phosphorus? Are we seeing decreases in total suspended solids? We can put some numbers to that, which is really exciting. When we're talking about water quality, these are kind of the prime parameters we're looking at. So one is Secchi depth. Secchi depth is a general indicator for overall water clarity. And it can be a good indicator for overall water quality as well. You take a Secchi depth measurement with a Secchi disc, and so that's what's on the image here. It's this black and white disc. You drop down into the water until you no longer see the difference between the black and white. Total suspended solids, that's like sediment suspended in the water column, and that would be a water chemistry parameter. We collect a sample and we bring it back. We have a laboratory on site at Lake County Health Department, and they run our samples. And then phosphorus levels. Phosphorus is one thing that contributes to harmful algal blooms. It also contributes to other impairments in the lake. So that's another one where we're collecting a sample and having it analyzed in the laboratory. So let's look at some of the results. So this graph is showing you Secchi depth by lake. And so if you remember, Secchi depth is water clarity readings. The dark blue, that's 2022. So what we can see is an increase in water clarity over time. So the first bar, the one that's kind of checkered on the left, that's our last lake report. So that one is typically pre any carp removal projects that have been done. And then we had 2021. Remember, 2021 is when we started our carp removal. And then 2022 is after. So in almost all the lakes we have been on, we've seen an increase, an improvement in water clarity on the lakes. And that is pretty exciting for us to see some water chemistry results that show an improvement from carp removal. This one is St. Mary's and Slough Lake. So St. Mary's on the left and Slough Lake on the right. We have a little bit more data here because these were some lakes we were doing in 2023 and 2024. So once again, 2024 is the orange bar. So you can see that is pretty much the deepest, right? The deepest bars you're seeing on here over time. And so we are seeing that improvement in water clarity over the years. So this is just another way to look at that. Hastings Lake, that's another Lake County Forest Preserve Lake. This is still Secchi depth readings that we're looking at. So we are seeing that improvement over time. You can kind of see the water clarity readings gradually getting better each month. So this is by month. You have April, May, June, July, August, and September at the top. And you can see how the water clarity is improving in each of those months over time. All right, another graph. So this is total phosphorus. So like I said, we collect water quality measurements. This is in Hastings Lake. And I know there's kind of a lot going on this graph, but we have taken water clarity in Hastings Lake over a number of years. So going back to 2001. So we have 2001, 2006, 2010, 2017, and 2024. So in this case, a higher phosphorus number is worse for water clarity. There is a standard for total phosphorus that is 0.05 milligrams per liter. And if it's above that level, it's impaired for phosphorus. So you can see our 2024 is at the very bottom here, this yellow. So in 2024, our values for phosphorus were much lower in every month, which is really exciting. It can be really hard to see improvements in water quality for these different analytes. Like usually it takes a decent amount of time to see those improvements. So we were very excited when we saw that these numbers were much lower over the historical values. So that was one example in Hastings Lake. We have another for Slough Lake. This one is a little more apparent, the improvement. So once again, that yellow is 2024. So you can see that is way below where it used to be for phosphorus. So for example, if we're looking at the green in 2010, that was above 0.2 milligrams per liter in May. And now we're less than 0.1. So it did have a significant decrease. There are certain lakes that were part of our project that we are seeing greater improvement than others. Typically, those were the lakes that had almost no aquatic plants to begin with, had a lot more carp, and were a little bit shallower lakes. We are tending to see a better improvement metric than some of the other ones. So that's something to take into consideration if carp removal will be an effective method for a lake. So all this would play into that. So I'm going to go through some photos for all the lakes. I'm going to start with Slough Lake. Oh, and I should go back. So this carp, this was our very first carp that we removed, which was pretty exciting. So back in March 2021, our first carp. Since then, we've done more than 10,000 carp. So we're not taking pictures of each one anymore, but that was the very first one that we removed. So for Slough Lake, our ultimate goal, as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, we were hoping to remove carp and give a chance for aquatic plants to grow, because aquatic plants are a key component to keeping a lake healthy. When we had done Slough Lake, I have another slide at this, our pre-carp removal projects had almost no plants. When we did aquatic plant survey, we almost found 0 plants there. You can see in 2020, this aerial image, not much plants there. You can see some of this green streaks in the water. There were a lot of algae blooms. So Slough Lake had historically a lot of blooms on that lake, so very high phosphorus levels. We put in a lot of effort along with Lake County Forest Preserve. So not only carp removal, but we've doing active plant restoration, which are some of the photos that you're seeing here. We actually started with enclosure fences. So that's what these fences are along the shoreline. And the thought process was, okay, we want to definitely keep the carp out to allow the plants to grow. So let's do a little fence structure. Let's plant some plants. Let's see how the plants do with no carp. And they did really well. And now they're growing outside of the fence structure. That's middle image that you can see. You can kind of see the plants growing in the lake. And then the far background, all those plants along the shoreline were plants that were planted. And those are still in the structure themselves. And we'll kind of give you some more examples. So these are some aerial images, and even just in the aerial images on the left and the right, you can see an increase in aquatic plant growth. This is all still in Slough Lake. So on the left, that was 2021. Same area of the lake on the right in 2022. You can see along the shoreline some areas popping up of plants. So you can kind of see this shading kind of along the shoreline. Those are all plants. And then in the lake itself, that's what it's looking like in the middle. So you can see the aquatic plants growing. As I mentioned back in 2019, so before we started carp removal, we did an aquatic plant survey. And on the left, the dots on the map, that's where we found aquatic plants. And we found very few. So there's maybe 5 points, and they all had less than 10% density of growth in those locations. On the right is an aquatic plant survey from 2024, and these are now all the locations where we're finding plants. So this is really exciting to us to go from a lake that had almost nothing to now has plants at multiple locations, and not just a small amount of density, but it can have higher quantities as well. That middle image is our rake. That's what we use to do plant surveys. We go to a number of points in the lake, we throw a rake, and then we pull up what plants we find, we identify all the plants, and we do an overall abundance. So that's what the rake looked like. So you can see lots of coontail on this rake, and a pretty high density. So all success from removing some carp. It allowed these plants to grow, and plants kind of compete with nutrients in the water. So they're taking up some of those nutrients, and that's allowing that phosphorus level to decrease. Here's another image of one of those plant enclosures along slough. And here's some of the plantings of plants. So these are more emergent plants, so up on the shoreline, as well as in the lake itself. So you can see it's really thriving. And again, some more images of the plants along slough. I'm going to move into some examples from St. Mary's Lake. So on St. Mary's Lake, we had no plants in 2015. So on the left is our grid. So we went to 123 sites on the lake, and we found 0 plants back in 2015. We did the same thing at St. Mary's Lake. We made a small enclosure. We planted some plants, and we saw how well they would be able to grow if we could keep carp away. And they did very well. You can start to see the plants growing in that enclosure. So we knew plants would be able to grow if we could limit the carp population. And now here are some more updated images from St. Mary's Lake. This is right along the shoreline, so this is in the very shallow areas, but we're starting to see some plants like American pondweed, which is in the middle, some coontail on the right. So we're starting to see these plants take hold. And remember, previously this lake had 0 plants in it. McDonald's Woods. So McDonald's Woods, we had a similar story. So in 2019, this is an aerial image, not many plants visible in the aerial. 2022 in the south part there, you start to see some plant growth. 2024, you definitely see some increased plant growth. These aerial images were all taken in July. And between 2021 and 2022, we removed about 2,500 carp. That number is much higher now because we've been doing it for an additional 2 years. And just a kind of a visual journey through McDonald's Lake. But this was year 1. You can see not much happening in the lake, pretty turbid, no plants. Year 2, we start to see some plants along the shoreline within the water itself, you can see. And then year 3. Now we have an abundance of plants. It's mostly coontail in McDonald's. Remember, McDonald's is also a very shallow lake. So the coontail is taking over much of the lake right now because it can reach basically to the bottom now. And just kind of a little image, you can kind of see McDonald's actually has 2 lakes. There's McDonald's 2 and McDonald's 1. In McDonald's 1, there was kind of our control scenario because that one originally didn't have carp there, and it had a decent aquatic plant growth. So the red little box in the highlight section out into 2, that's showing you that there's some coontail plants growing in that area. And this was back in 2019. Unfortunately, carp ended up getting into McDonald's 1. It's just connected by a small spillway. So in high flood levels, they can make their way in. And now you can really see, wow, how turbid, right? On the left there, how turbid that McDonald's 1 gets. It has no more plants. It's full of carp. And then that is draining into McDonald's 2. And you can kind of see that plume going in. So it's almost like we reversed it. So McDonald's 2 used to have no plants and a lot of carp. And McDonald's 1 used to have a lot of plants and little carp, and now it's almost the opposite scenario. So we will be hoping to work on both lakes to kind of help get this issue under control. And this was taken from this aerial images from 2024. We've also worked on McDonald's has an outlet. So carp can come up the stream and make their way into the lake. So this is what it was previously. And in high flow years, you can imagine carp can get over this area. And so we did put a carp barrier in to help limit the movement of carp. So we really are trying multiple ways along with the forest preserve to limit how many carp are moving up into those lakes. And so overall, we've seen a big improvement in these lakes, especially in water clarity. So that was that Secchi disc measurement. And then what's really exciting is we're starting to see that improvement in total phosphorus and total suspended solids in the lake. And it's been really exciting to see, especially for us. We previously had not seen these lakes with any plants, and we're now seeing a very strong community of plants and those phosphorus levels decreasing. So we're hoping to get more data on this. And this is our staff for ecological services on here. So myself, we have Gerard Urbanozo and James Fitzgerald. Nick's was our temp water quality tech this summer, so he helped out with some of these services as well. But it's been a pretty exciting project for us. The grant is officially ended, but we do have like a 10-year maintenance requirement with it. So we are going out to these lakes still every year. We try to get to the lakes at least twice a year. There's 8 on that list. And then some lakes we're going more frequently. As I mentioned, we are typically targeting them in the spring. That's when they're spawning. So we can get kind of the biggest bang for our buck at that time and just really get to remove as many as we can. We will do it in fall as well. So basically spring and fall are our main ones. So I kept it a little bit shorter because I'm open to any questions you guys have. And yes, I don't know if this is a good time to kind of.
Well, thank you very much.
I do have some
Alana.
questions.
And I know we have some questions, so I'm going to toss it over to Steve.
Okay, let me go back to the beginning. I had 2 myself. How often do the teams operate when they're every month when they were operating, a lot? And are there weather temperature? I understand if it's thunderstorming, they can't do
Yeah.
it, but if there are there weather and temperature conditions that make it impossible to do this activity?
Yeah, so good question. So how often we're operating in a month can vary. So in typically April, May, June will be the months that we are operating the most. And that could be maybe like 2 weeks out of that month. We also have a bunch of other water quality projects that we're committed to, different monitoring. So that leaves us about 2 weeks of those months that we can commit to carp. And then again, that picks up in like September, October, November. There are some weather limitations. Typically, we want the water temperature to get to like a certain degree. That's just mostly for the spawning. That's how we know they're going to be more active. And then what's more important is every time we're out there, we're taking dissolved oxygen levels of the water. So we want them to be above 5 milligrams per liter. Actually, we would probably want them to be higher. If it's below that, we will not do carp shocking for that day. We don't want to stress the non-carp species anymore than we have to. So that's our biggest consideration.
Okay. Rosemary had a question. Are these the same type of carp that are a worry to the Illinois River that have come in? Are this the same species? And
So it's a different species than those. So yeah, those are the ones a lot of people will think of, the ones that are kind of jumping out of the water or flying into your boat. So this is a different species, but they are in the same kind of family. So we haven't found that type of carp up in this area yet. It is on everybody's radar if it's going to make its way, into this region. This common carp, that's the Asian carp. This common carp is more, you'll find that in more water bodies, but still an invasive species.
okay. Doug, I think you mentioned this a little bit. Do you plan to expand the carp removal in the oncoming in additional lakes to what you're doing now?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we do hope to expand. We are currently, we started with the ones that we had the grant for. We're still kind of in that maintenance phase, but we are hoping to expand to other lakes. And we have kind of found, right, those criteria that work best for carp removal. It is sometimes those lakes that had minimal plants are a little bit shallower and high carp density. So we kind of know which ones to focus on. Mhm.
Okay. Another question is from Doug. What do you do with the carp that are removed?
Yep, that's a great question. So all these carp are returned back to the land. So we have a workaround with Lake County Forest Preserve. So they actually are put onto property in forest preserve property to act as a nutrient source for the land.
Okay.
So like usually carp are used for, like, farmers love to use carp in the process because they're a high nutrient. That's also why we're removing them from lakes. So we're able to kind of put that back on the land and give those nutrients back into like land plants, but keep them out of the water.
Okay. And I think that's all the questions I have. Let me just scroll down. That's it. That's all that I have.
Well,
If anybody else has a question,
yeah, thank you. I can't make my camera work and I can't make my chat work. But I had a question about the plants and
Yeah.
the plant choice. Are there difficult or problem plant species? And are there favorite plant species? And are you trying to keep it all native?
Yes. So, yep, we are trying to keep it all native. There are problem plant species, and those would be those invasive species. So things like Eurasian water milfoil, curly leaf pondweed. There's a newer one that we recently found a couple years ago, starry stonewort. Those are some of all the invasive species. For this work, any plantings that we're doing native plants. We have found certain plants will repropagate better and do better like transplanting into lakes. So those do tend to be like American pondweed, sago pondweed, things like that. They're all native, but they do tend to just last better when we're transplanting them. And so we're starting with those and hoping more kind of come in. The kind of cool thing about plants is they can kind of live in the seed bank of a lake for a long time. And then when conditions are ready, they will grow themselves. So most of these lakes do have a seed bank of plants from a long time ago as well. So we're hoping, by removing the carp, we're giving them the right conditions for also kind of grow.
That was my second question was where does one go to buy native aquatic plants? I've never seen them at the plant store.
Yep. So there are some nurseries that will that you can buy a native aquatic plant. So yeah, typically you're like, some of like people who have like water gardens on their property, those might be some of the same places where these are coming from, but you do have to be careful about which type of plants you're buying. We have one that's located kind of just over the Wisconsin border. That's where we've gotten some in the past. We've also you can also redistribute plants within a lake itself. So if you have one area of a lake that's growing a lot of plants, you can just propagate from within the lake itself and move it to other locations in the lake. So we've done both of those.
And who plants them? Is this where you make use of your interns?
Yeah, they definitely are helping, but it is kind of all hands on deck. So both Forest Preserve and Health Department, yep, went in and planted. Yep, very wet work because you are in the water. It's difficult to plant plants in water, if you can imagine. So it does take some skill, but they have taken off. And once they kind of get established, then they're growing on themselves. So it's just that initial effort. And really, Slough Lake is the one that we have focused. Slough and St. Mary's, we focused on doing some planting on our end. The other lakes, we really didn't do active planting. We just removed the carp and then the plants were increasing on their own.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions that we missed?
Well, I just thought of one. I was surprised when I first heard that the health department was involved in water and lake issue.
Yep.
What is the connection there?
Yeah, it is. It's very unique. We're one of the only ones that have this water quality portion to it. And that is because of the high number of lakes that we have in Lake County. It was actually built into like the charter of the health department that part of our role is protecting those resources, especially like if you think about it in the terms of beaches. So we monitor all the swimming beaches in the summer for E. coli and telling people if it's safe or not safe to swim in. I feel like that's a really clear connection for the health department side, and it's kind of just expanded into like a larger ecological side. But it is
That-
unique. Mhm.
Thank you.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you so much, Alana, for coming and sharing. There have been some references put in the chat for people if you want to look up some things. I know they're in there. And I do want to thank you again a million times for coming on this
Yeah,
Sunday
you're
evening.
welcome.
I have a couple of announcements, and you're going to have to just look at that picture of the canoe, the kayaker on the river. Well, I'm making this because I can't make my camera work. Woods and Wetlands Final Speaker Series for 2024 is going to be a very special event on Thursday, November 21st. Doug, can you put that slide up that I sent you, please? While he's working on that, I will tell you about it. We are partnering with Lake County Forest Preserve District to bring an in-person program, which will be at the wonderful Dunn Museum in Libertyville. This is, if you haven't been there, it is well worth a trip. Dr. Stan Gert and Carrie Luff. Dr. Gert is from Ohio State, and they will be sharing stories and highlights of their new book, Coyotes Among Us, Secrets of the City's Top Predator. We will hear about the amazing ghost dogs of the prairies and now big cities from their decades of research. Stan got interested in the coyotes in downtown Chicago when he was working on another project, and this has been 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. I'm sure you may have seen them on the Chicago news because they often will show them walking right down Michigan Avenue. So we've invited them, and because Woods and Wetlands doesn't have headquarters central, we got together with the Lake County Forest Preserve, and they said, let's work on it together. And they're giving us the Dunn Museum to do this. Books will be available for purchase at the museum if you wish to own one, or you can bring your own copy to have it signed. An author's talk will follow the presentation. This program will be available on Zoom for anyone who wants to watch it at home in their pajamas, or we will have an in-person presentation also. The program will be at 6:30 to 7:30. To register, please go to the Lake County Forest Preserve website and register for either the in-person or the Zoom. I must say there are limited seats available for in-person, but you can register all these in advance, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. I have heard Dr. Stan speak before, and he never tells the same story twice. So I, for one, am very excited about this. And thanks to all of the Woods and Wetlands group and all of Sierra Club for allowing us to get this thing going. Thank you for joining us this evening. And again, special thanks to Alana for sharing the lake projects. You will be receiving an email from me later this week with the YouTube address for the tape video of this program if you want to watch it again, or if somebody you know would be interested in it, we would encourage you to share it. There's a lot going on in our Lake County environs, and We're so delighted that you joined us tonight. Thank you all. Good night.